Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Konvent, Called Down the Sun, out March 11th on Napalm Records. The album has 9 tracks, 45 minutes in length, and this is the band's second full-length studio album. They are a Danish death doom metal band. As far as the overall design is concerned, this record offers a lot of similarities to Puritan masochism. It's balanced, it's cohesive, it's compact. It moves very slowly within the songs, but it offers some momentum outside of them in terms of how each track interacts with one another. And this is an important element. If these songs had a break or a pause in between them, this album would be unbearable because it would not only move slowly, it would just stagnate. You would feel a sense of pause at each and every single track. So having this continuous motion from song to song, it increases the fluidity of the album, makes the album feel like it's actually going somewhere, which makes the record more entertaining, more engaging, easier to digest, increasing the overall playability. As far as the soundscape goes, you're gonna see that death doom blackened sound of Konvent alive and well on this record, but I also feel like they peeled some layers and allow you to see two elements that were there before, but allowing these elements to have a bigger impact on this album, and that is funeral doom and sludge. When you bring these two together, you allow the record to be darker on one hand and also feel and sound thicker. These two elements really become the calling card of the entire record. This is a much darker album, there's no questions about it, and it feels like it gets darker and darker with every passing moment. And that is a very important aspect because it also adds to the mobility of the record, but from an atmospheric perspective. As far as the thickness of sound, there is also fuzziness in the sound. But while it has grit, while it has dirt around the edges, you can still hear what's happening with all the different elements. But it's definitely a record that's driven by the guitars and vocals, and it pushes the drums and bass a little bit more to the background. Now, these four elements combining with one another and having that grit, having that fuzziness, it's really when you're going to get this big volume, this big presence that the album has without really having to increase heaviness or without having to do too much. You still have this large footprint of sound that exists song in and song out, staying very constant. This is an album that it's easy to tell the similarities between the songs, a little bit harder to tell the things that make them unique within themselves. Now, having the drums in the background and bass, it's important because it allows them to have a secondary role at first glance, but a very important role in terms of creating the foundation, the roadmap in which the record is going to navigate across. And it allows the guitars to free themselves a little bit more in the forefront with the vocals, and those two elements together then drive the listener or drag the listener throughout each and every single track. Now, I like the sound of the drums, I like the sound of the bass, and I like the role that they're playing because it really makes the album feel a little bit more unique in its experience, and it makes the soundscape a little bit richer. Now, the guitar experience is phenomenal because on one hand you have this melodic, melancholic riffs and melodic and melancholic drive that almost ignites the experience of the listener, that allows you to feel like you're getting a little bit of momentum within the songs even though you're not going that far. And on the other hand, they have that fuzz, they have that dirt, they have that grit that increases the volume, that murkies the waters, that gets the atmosphere to permeate throughout the songs, allowing that sense of darkness to become constant. So finding a balance between these two becomes almost something that drives each and every single track because you can feel the balance, you can feel the battle between them, between that fuzziness, that darkness, and the melancholic melodic drive that ignites the tracks. Now, some songs have more of one, less of the other, and those are the nuances that you need on a record like this in order for you to be able to tell the forest from the trees. Otherwise, every song would sound exactly the same. Now, the other element that pushes this album forward is the vocals. Rike is phenomenal on this record, but I felt like she went more with her guttural side of her range than her screams. And I could understand the approach because it has an impact, an immediate impact, not just on the soundscape, but also on the atmosphere of this record. If you're going to have an album that has this big volume, this big sound, the vocals have to help that experience. And using her gutturals definitely does that because her gutturals grounds the record, it brings the album down, it gives them a little bit more substance, it fills in the darkness, it fills in the void, it allows the overall experience to be more welcoming, and you feel the walls are crumbling around you when she's using that side of her range. And she uses that side of her range, I would say, about 80% of the time throughout this entire record. When she goes with her screams, the screams spread the record. They don't make the album feel bigger, they just make the foundations of the album feel wider. So it's a different approach that for an album like this still works, because you need those nuances within the songs. So it's not just a one style or one size fits all approach from beginning to end, but you don't need too much of it, because you're not trying to make the album bigger in terms of the footprint that it has. You're trying to make the album bigger in terms of the essence that it holds, the atmosphere, the sound, the experience. And that's exactly what she's doing with her voice, complementing really well what's happening on the musical side. Overall, this is an album that has a lot to offer, but you're not going to get all of it at the first time going around it. You have to listen to this album multiple times. I felt like the experience, my interest, my engagement with the record became bigger and bigger, better and better with every time that I listened to this record. The first time that I went through it, I got a few things, I understood a few nuances, but it was still very murky, it was still very dirty, it was hard for me to define exactly what was happening on any given song. The more that I listened to the album, the better I understood the record, the better I understood exactly what the similarities were of the sound, and the better I understood the differences that the songs had between them. And once I was able to divide these two camps, then the enjoyment increased, the entertainment level went through the roof, and that increases the overall playability of the album, makes you want to go back to it time and time again, because you don't feel like the album is repetitive, you feel like the album is fresh, you just have to find that freshness. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Into the Distance. This is the opening track. The reason I picked this song is because this opening track sets the table, sets the tone, it sets the mood for the entire record. What you're going to get in this song, as far as the construction is concerned, as far as sound goes, atmosphere and vocals, is exactly more or less what you're going to get throughout the entire record. This song is a very good microcosms of the album in general. It sets the table. It's methodic, it's melodic, it has that kind of approach where the methodic side of the song blends in with the melodic side of the song, making you feel welcome but moving very slowly. The guitars have that fuzziness in their sound, which adds texture, it adds volume, and then Ricky has those guttural vocals that absolute dominate the track, that ground the song, that drag you through it. A very important element, and an element that you're going to see song in and song out playing the same similar role, just in different perspectives. Now the last third, the guitars push this song a little bit more, so you get a very methodic approach from the beginning for the first 2/3 of the track, and then in the last third the guitars pick up a little bit more momentum, the song picks up a little bit more movement, and then that has a positive impact in how you feel towards the song, but it doesn't change the overall darkness and atmosphere that the track holds. Next you have Fatamorgana. This is one of my favorite songs on the album. I just love how this song sounds and how this song feels. It has a super fuzzy, distorted opening, and you feel like there's a melody in there, but it's very hard to break it down. And then as the song progresses, that fuzziness, that distortion starts to weed itself out, and the melody jumps into the forefront, and then that melody becomes the backbone of the entire song. The entire song lives off of that melody. It's still very methodic, but not as methodic as Into the Distance. This one moves a little bit better, has a little bit more movement, if you will, in terms of how it's designed, in terms of the flow that it gives. The vocals, once again, those gutturals really drag the listener through it. But now, because there's a little bit more movement, you don't feel like you're just kind of sinking in. You feel like you're actually taking some steps with them. So the vocals are not just dragging you through, they're also helping guide the experience, guide the listener through this song. The melodic sound that the track has, it's really interesting because it mixed in with those powerful gutturals really works well. The song becomes almost dynamic. I hate to say that because it's not a dynamic song by no means, but the movement that the track creates with those incredible guitar melodies and those guttural vocals is the yin and the yang, but the two interact so well with one another that almost breathes life. It breathes life into how this song moves, into how this song feels, and in terms of how you're going to perceive it. Now, pushing some screams into this track helps jolt the track. It helps flatten out the track. It's almost a reset. So every time she uses her screams on this song, you feel like there is a reset button being pressed. And that is really important as well because it overall gives more dynamic movement to the overall construction of the song, how you perceive the song, and how you feel towards it. Finishing the track with some choir vocals a few times, it almost brought a little bit of folk into the overall design of the song. And it works really well when you think about the lyrical content of the track. So adding those choirs, those backing vocals at the end of the track, it doesn't change that much of the DNA of the song, but it gives you a different feel towards the end. Coming at the end is perfect because you want to keep the song as intact as possible throughout the entire experience. And if you're going to throw a curveball, throw it at the end where it has perhaps less of a negative impact, more of a positive impact. And that's exactly what's happening here. Last but not least, we have Harena. The violin and cello in this song is phenomenal. This is the last song on the album. Perhaps the most engaging, the most entertaining, the most diverse song on the entire record. Every track on this album, you can feel where it's taking you, you can feel where it's going, and you can almost see what's coming. It's familiar ground. This track, because of the influences that the cello and the violin give, not just to the sound, but to the atmosphere, allow the track to feel very different from everything that came before. I don't think there's any other place to put this song but last track on the record. If you want to surprise the listener, you want to surprise the listener at the end, after you go through, after you cross the desert throughout the previous 8 tracks, you give you a little bit of an oasis at the end of the album. That's exactly how this song comes about. I love the sound, I love the experience, I love the beauty that it has in the melody and the overall feel, the atmosphere that it creates. It still has darkness. That's the beauty of it. It still has darkness. It's just a different kind of shade of darkness from the previous tracks. Incredible how much of an impact that violin and cello do to how not only you feel the song, how you perceive the song. Just phenomenal track all around. Beautiful song. This is it. Konvent, Called Down the Sun, out March 11th on Napalm Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.